An unabridged studio recording of Thank You, Jeeves by P.G. Wodehouse, narrated by Alexander Spencer. This work, copyrighted 1933 by P.G. Wodehouse, is recorded by permission of the Scott Meredith Literary Agency, Incorporated. Chapter 1. Jeeves Gives Notice. I was a shade perturbed. Nothing to signify, really, but still just a spot concerned. As I sat in the old flat, idly touching the strings of my banjolele, an instrument to which I'd become greatly addicted of late, you couldn't have said that the brow was actually furrowed, and yet, on the other hand, you couldn't have stated absolutely that it wasn't. Perhaps the word pensive about covers it. It seemed to me that a situation fraught with embarrassing potentialities had arisen. "Jeeves," I said, "do you know what?" "No, sir." "Do you know whom I saw last night?" "No, sir." "J. Washburn Stoker and his daughter Pauline." "Indeed, sir." "They must be over here." "It would seem so, sir." "Awkward, what?" "I can conceive that after what occurred in New York it might be distressing for you to encounter Miss Stoker, sir, but I fancy the contingency need scarcely arise." I weighed this. When you start talking about contingencies arising, Jeeves, the brain seems to flicker, and I rather miss the gist. Do you mean that I ought to be able to keep out of her way? Yes, sir. Avoid her? Yes, sir. I played 5 bars of Old Man River with something of abandon. His pronouncement had eased my mind. I followed his reasoning. After all, London's a large place. Quite simple not to run into people if you don't want to. It gave me rather a shock, though. I can readily imagine so, sir. Accentuated by the fact that they were accompanied by Sir Roderick Glossop. Indeed, sir. Yes, it was at the Savoy Grill. They were putting on the nosebag together at the table by the window. And here's rather a rummy thing, Jeeves. The 4th member of the party was Lord Chuffnell's aunt, Myrtle. What would she be doing in that gang? Possibly her ladyship is an acquaintance either of Mr. Stoker, Miss Stoker, or Sir Roderick, sir. Yes, that may be so. Yes, that might account for it. But it surprised me, I confess. Did you enter into conversation with them, sir? Who, me? No, Jeeves. I was out of the room like a streak. Apart from wishing to dodge the Stokers, can you see me wantonly and deliberately going and chatting with old Glossop? Certainly he has never proved a very congenial companion in the past, sir. If there's one man in the world I hope never to exchange speech with again, it's that old crumb. I forgot to mention, sir, that Sir Roderick called to see you this morning. What? Yes, sir. He called to see me? Yes, sir. After what has passed between us? Yes, sir. Well, I'm dashed. Yes, sir. I informed him that you hadn't yet risen, and he said that he would return later. He did he? I laughed. One of those sardonic ones. Well, when he does, set the dog on him. We have no dog, sir. Then step down to the flat below and borrow Mrs. Tinkler Molker's Pomeranian. Paying social calls after the way he behaved in New York? I never heard of such a thing. Did you ever hear of such a thing, Jeeves? I confess that in the circumstances his advent occasioned me surprise, sir. I should think it did. Good Lord! Good heavens! Good gosh! The man must have the crust of a rhinoceros. And when I've given you the inside story, I think you'll agree with me that my heat was justified. Let me marshal my facts and go to it. About 3 months before, noting a certain liveliness in my Aunt Agatha, I deemed it prudent to pop across to New York for a space to give her time to blow over. And about halfway through my first week there, in the course of a beano of some description at the Sherry Netherland, I made the acquaintance of Pauline Stoker. She got right in amongst me. Her beauty maddened me like wine. "Jeeves," I recollect saying on returning to the apartment, "who was the fellow when looking at something felt like somebody looking at something? I learned the passage at school, but it's escaped me." "I fancy the individual you have in mind, sir, is the poet Keats, who compared his emotions on first reading Chapman's Homer to those of stout Cortez when, with eagle eyes, he stared at the Pacific." "The Pacific, eh?" "Yes, sir. and all his men looked at each other with a wild surmise, silent upon a peak in Darien. Of course, it all comes back to me. Well, that's how I felt this afternoon on being introduced to Miss Pauline Stoker. Press the trousers with special care tonight, Jeeves. I'm dining with her. In New York, I've always found one gets off the mark quickly in matters of the heart. This, I believe, is due to something in the air. 2 weeks later, I proposed to Pauline. She accepted me. So far, so good. But mark the sequel. Scarcely 48 hours after that, a monkey wrench was bunged into the machinery and the whole thing was off. The hand that flung that monkey wrench was the hand of Sir Roderick Glossop. In these memoirs of mine, as you may recall, I've had occasion to make somewhat frequent mention of this old pot of poison. A ball-domed, bushy-browed blighter, ostensibly a nerve specialist, but in reality, as everybody knows, nothing more nor less than a high-priced loony doctor. He's been cropping up in my path for years, always with the most momentous results. And it so happened that he was in New York when the announcement of my engagement appeared in the papers. What brought him there was one of his periodical visits to J. Washburn Stoker's second cousin, George. This George was a man who, after a lifetime of doing down the widow and orphan, had begun to feel the strain of it. His conversation was odd, and he had a tendency to walk on his hands. He'd been a patient of Sir Roderick's for some years, and it was the latter's practice to dash over to New York every once in a while to take a look at him. He arrived on the present occasion just in time to read over the morning coffee and egg the news that Bertram Wooster and Pauline Stoker were planning to do the wedding glide. And as far as I can ascertain, he was at the telephone ringing up the father of the bride-to-be without so much as stopping to wipe his mouth. Well, what he told J. Washburn about me I can't, of course, say, but as a venture I imagine he informed him that I had once been engaged to his daughter Honoria, and that he'd broken off the match because he'd decided that I was balmy to the core. He would have touched, no doubt, on the incident of the cats and the fish in my bedroom, possibly also on the episode of the stolen hat and my habit of climbing down waterspouts, winding up, it may be, with a description of the unfortunate affair of the punctured hot water bottle at Lady Wickham's. A close friend of J. Washburn's, and a man on whose judgment J.W. relied, I take it that he had little difficulty in persuading the latter that I was not the ideal son-in-law. At any rate, as I say, within a mere 48 hours of the holy moment, I was notified that it would be unnecessary for me to order the new sponge-bag trousers and gardenia, because my nomination had been cancelled. And it was this man who was having the cool, to come calling at the Wooster home. I mean, I ask you. I resolved to be pretty terse with him. I was still playing the banjolele when he arrived. Those who know Bertram Wooster best are aware that he's a man of sudden, strong enthusiasms, and that when in the grip of one of these he becomes a remorseless machine, tense, absorbed, single-minded. It was so in the matter of this banjolele playing of mine. Since the night at the Alhambra, when the supreme virtuosity of Ben Bloom and his 16 Baltimore buddies had fired me to take up the study of the instrument, not a day had passed without its couple of hours' assiduous practice. And I was twanging the strings like one inspired when the door opened and Jeeves shovelled in the foul straight waistcoat specialist to whom I've just been alluding. In the interval which had elapsed since I'd first been apprised of the man's desire to have speech with me, I'd been thinking things over, and the only conclusion to which I could come was that he must have had a change of heart of some nature and decided that an apology was due me for the way he'd behaved. It was, therefore, a somewhat softened Bertram Wooster who now rose to do the honours. "Ah, Sir Roderick," I said, "good morning." Nothing could have exceeded the courtesy with which I'd spoken. Conceive of my astonishment, therefore, when his only reply was a grunt, and an indubitably unpleasant grunt at that. I felt that my diagnosis of the situation had been wrong. Right off the bull's-eye I had been. Here was no square-shooting apologizer. He couldn't have been glaring at me with more obvious distaste if I'd been the germ of dementia precox. Well, if that was the attitude he was proposing to adopt, well, I mean to say, my geniality waned. I drew myself up coldly, at the same time raising a stiff eyebrow, and I was just about to work off the old "to what am I indebted for this visit" gag, when he chipped in ahead of me. "You ought to be certified." "I beg your pardon?" You're a public menace. For weeks, it appears, you've been making life a hell for all your neighbours with some hideous musical instrument. I see you have it with you now. How dare you play that thing in a respectable block of flats? Infernal din. I remained cool and dignified. Did you say infernal din? I did. Oh, well, let me tell you that the man that hath no music in himself... I stepped to the door. Jeeves, I called down the passage, what was it Shakespeare said the man who hadn't music in himself was fit for? Treasons, stratagems, and spoils, sir. Thank you, Jeeves. Is fit for treasons, stratagems, and spoils, I said, returning. He danced a step or two. Are you aware that the occupant of the flat below, Mrs. Tinkler Molker, is one of my patients, a woman in a highly nervous condition? I've had to give her a sedative. I raised a hand. Spare me the gossip from the loony bin, I said distantly. Might I inquire on my side if you're aware that Mrs. Tinkler Molker owns a Pomeranian? Don't drivel. I'm not drivelling. This animal yaps all day and not infrequently far into the night. So, Mrs. Tinkler Molker has had the nerve to complain of my banjolele, has she? Ha! Let her first pluck out the pom which is in her own eye, I said, becoming a bit scriptural. He chafed visibly. I'm not here to talk about dogs. I wish for your assurance that you will immediately cease annoying this unfortunate woman. I shook the head. I'm sorry she's a cold audience, but my art must come first. That's your final word, is it? It is. Very good, you will hear more of this. And Mrs. Tinkler Molker will hear more of this, I replied, brandishing the banjolele. I touched the buzzer. Jeeves, I said, show Sir R. Glossop out. I confess that I was well pleased with the manner in which I'd comported myself during this clash of wills. There was a time, you must remember, when the sudden appearance of old Glossop in my sitting-room would have been enough to send me bolting for cover like a rabbit. But since then I'd passed through the furnace, and the sight of him no longer filled me with a nameless dread. With a good deal of quiet satisfaction, I proceeded to play The Wedding of the Painted Doll, Singing in the Rain, Three Little Words, Good Night, Sweetheart, My Love Parade, Spring is Here, Whose Baby Are You, and part of I Want an Automobile with a Horn That Goes Toot-Toot, in the order named. And it was as I was approaching the end of this last number that the telephone rang. I went to the instrument and stood listening, and as I listened, my face grew hard and set. "Very good, Mr. Manglehoffer," I said coldly. "You may inform Mrs. Tinkler Molker and her associates that I choose the latter alternative." I touched the bell. "Jeeves," I said, "there's been a spot of trouble." "Indeed, sir." "Unpleasantness is rearing its ugly head in Berkeley Mansions, W1. I note also a lack of give and take and an absence of the neighbourly spirit. I've just been talking to the manager of this building on the telephone, and he's delivered an ultimatum. He says I must either chuck playing the banjolele or clear out." "Indeed, sir." "Complaints, it would seem, have been lodged by the Honourable Mrs. Tinkler Molker of C6, by Lieutenant Colonel J.J. Bustard, DSO, of B5, and Sir Everard and Lady Blenner Hassett of B7. "All right, so be it. I don't care. We shall be well rid of these Tinkler Molkers, these Bustards, and these Blenner Hassets. I leave them without a pang." "You're proposing to move, sir?" I raised the eyebrows. "Surely, Jeeves, you can't imagine that I ever considered any other course." "But I fear you will encounter a similar hostility elsewhere, sir." "Not where I'm going. It's my intention to retire to the depths of the country. In some old-world sequestered nook I shall find a cottage and there resume my studies." "A cottage, sir?" "A cottage, Jeeves. If possible, honeysuckle covered." The next moment you could have knocked me down with a toothpick. There was a brief pause, and then Jeeves, whom I've nurtured in my bosom, so to speak, for years and years and years, gave a sort of cough, and there proceeded from his lips these incredible words: "In that case, I fear I must give my notice." There was a tense silence. I stared at the man. "Jeeves," I said, "and you wouldn't be far out in describing me as stunned. Did I hear you correctly?" "Yes, sir." "You actually contemplate leaving my entourage?" "Only with the greatest reluctance, sir. But if it's your intention to play that instrument within the narrow confines of a country cottage—" I drew myself up. "You say that instrument, Jeeves, and you say it in an unpleasant, soupy voice. Am I to understand that you dislike this banjolele?" "Yes, sir." "You've stood it all right up to now." "With grave difficulty, sir." "And let me tell you that better men than you have stood worse than banjoleles. Are you aware that a certain Bulgarian, Ilya Gospodinov, once played the bagpipes for 24 hours without a stop? Ripley vouches for this in his Believe It or Not." "Indeed, sir." "Well, do you suppose Gospodinov's personal attendant kicked? A laughable idea. They're made of better stuff than that in Bulgaria. I'm convinced that he was behind the young master from start to finish of his attempt on the Central European record, and I've no doubt frequently rallied round with ice packs and other restoratives." "Be Bulgarian, Jeeves." "No, sir. I fear I cannot recede from my position." "But dash it, you say you are receding from your position." "I should have said I cannot abandon the stand which I have taken." "Oh." I mused a while. "You mean this, Jeeves?" "Yes, sir." "You've thought about it all carefully, weighing the pros and cons, balancing this against that?" "Yes, sir." "And you're resolved?" "Yes, sir. If it's really your intention to continue playing that instrument, I have no option but to leave." The Wooster blood boiled over. Circumstances of recent years have so shaped themselves as to place this blighter in a position which you might describe as that of a domestic Mussolini. But forgetting this and sticking simply to the cold fact, what is Jeeves, after all? A valet, a salaried attendant. And a fellow simply can't go on truckling, do I mean truckling? I know it begins with a T, to his valet forever. There comes a moment when he must remember that his ancestors did dashed well at the Battle of Crécy and put the old foot down. This moment had now arrived. Then leave, dash it! Very good, sir. Chapter 2. Chuffy. I confess that it was in sombre mood that I assembled the stick, the hat, and the lemon-coloured gloves some half-hour later and strode out into the streets of London. But though I didn't care to think what existence would be like without Jeeves, I had no thought of weakening. As I turned the corner into Piccadilly, I was a thing of fire and chill steel, and I think in about another half-jiffy I should have been snorting, if not actually shouting, the ancient battle-cry of the Woosters, hadn't I observed on the skyline a familiar form. This familiar form was none other than that of my boyhood friend, the 5th Baron Chuffnell, the chap, if you remember, whose Aunt Myrtle I had seen the previous night hobnobbing with the hellhound Glossop. The sight of him reminded me that I was in the market for a country cottage, and that here was the very chap to supply same. I wonder if I've ever told you about Chuffy. Stop me if I have. He's a fellow I've known more or less all my life, he and self having been at private school, Eton and Oxford together. We don't see a frightful lot of one another nowadays, however, as he spends most of his time down at Chuffnell Regis on the coast of Somersetshire, where he owns an enormous great place with about 150 rooms and miles of rolling parkland. Don't run away, however, on the strength of this, with the impression that Chuffy is one of my wealthier cronies. He's dashed hard up, poor bloke, like most fellows who own land, and only lives at Chuffnell Hall because he's stuck with it and can't afford to live anywhere else. If somebody came to him and offered to buy the place, he'd kiss him on both cheeks. But who wants to buy a house that size in these times? He can't even let it. So he sticks on there most of the year, with nobody to talk to except the local doctor and parson and his Aunt Myrtle and her 12-year-old son Seabury, who live at the dower house in the park. A pretty mouldy existence for one who at the university gave bright promise of becoming one of the lads. Chuffy also owns the village of Chuffnell Regis. Not that that does him much good either. I mean to say, the taxes on the estate and all the expenses of repairs and what-not come to pretty nearly as much as he gets out of the rents, making the thing more or less of a washout. Still, he's the landlord, and as such would doubtless have dozens of cottages at his disposal, and probably be only too glad of the chance of easing one of them off onto a reputable tenant like myself. "You're the very chap I wanted to see, Chuffy," I said accordingly after our initial what-hoing. "Come right along with me to the Drones for a bite of lunch. I can put a bit of business in your way." He shook his head wistfully, I thought. "I'd like to, Bertie, but I'm due at the Carlton in 5 minutes. I'm lunching with a man." "Give him a miss." "I couldn't. Well, bring him along then, and we'll make it a threesome. Chuffy smiled rather wanly. I don't think you'd enjoy it, Bertie. He's Sir Roderick Glossop. I goggled. It's always a bit of a shock when you've just parted from Bloke A to meet Bloke B, and have Bloke B suddenly bring Bloke A into the conversation. Sir Roderick Glossop? Yes. But I didn't know you knew him. I don't very well. Just met him a couple of times. He's a great friend of my Aunt Myrtle. Ah, that explains it. I saw her dining with him last night. Well, if you come to the Carlton, you'll see me lunching with him today. But, Chuffy, old man, is this wise? Is this prudent? It's an awful ordeal breaking bread with this man, I know. I've done it. I dare say, but I've got to go through with it. I had an urgent wire from him yesterday telling me to come up and see him without fail, and what I'm hoping is that he wants to take the hall for the summer, or knows somebody who does. He would hardly wire like that unless there was something up. No, I shall have to stick it, Bertie. But I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll dine with you tomorrow night. I would have been all for it, of course, had the circs been different, but I had to refuse. I'd formed my plans and made my arrangements, and they could not be altered. I'm sorry, Chuffy, I'm leaving London tomorrow. You are? Yes, the management of the building where I reside has offered me the choice between clearing out immediately or ceasing to play the banjolele. I elected to do the former. I'm going to take a cottage in the country somewhere, and that's what I meant when I said I could put business in your way. Can you let me have a cottage? I'll give you the choice of half a dozen. It must be quiet and secluded. I shall be playing the banjolele a good deal. I've got the very shack for you, on the edge of the harbour, and not a neighbour within a mile except Police Sergeant Vowles, and he plays the harmonium. You could do duets. Fine. And there's a troupe of nigger minstrels down there this year. You could study their technique. Chuffy, it sounds like heaven, and we shall be able to see something of each other for a change. You don't come playing your damned banjolele at the hall. No, old man, but I'll drop over to lunch with you most days. Thanks. Don't mention it. By the way, what has Jeeves got to say about all this? I shouldn't have thought he would have cared about leaving London. I stiffened a little. Jeeves has nothing to say on that or any other subject. We have parted brass rags. What? I had anticipated that the news would stagger him. Yes, I said, from now on Jeeves will take the high road and I'll take the low road. He had the immortal rind to tell me that if I didn't give up my banjolele, he would resign. I accepted his portfolio. You've really let him go? I have. Well, well, well. I waved a hand nonchalantly. These things happen, I said. I'm not pretending I'm pleased, of course, but I can bite the bullet. My self-respect would not permit me to accept the man's terms. You can push a Wooster just so far. Very good, Jeeves, I said to him. So be it. I shall watch your future career with considerable interest. And that was that. We walked on for a bit in silence. So, you've parted with Jeeves, have you? Said Chuffy in a thoughtful sort of voice. Well, well, well. Any objection to my looking in and saying good-bye to him? None whatever. It would be a graceful act. Quite. I've always admired his intellect. Me too. No one more. I'll go round to the flat after lunch. Follow the green line, I said, and my manner was airy and even careless. This parting of the ways with Jeeves had made me feel a bit as if I'd just stepped on a bomb and was trying to piece myself together again in a bleak world, but we Woosters can keep the stiff upper lip. I lunched at the Drones and spent the afternoon there. I had much to think of. Chuffy's news that there was a troupe of nigger minstrels performing on the Chuffnell Regis sands had definitely weighed the scale down on the side of the advantages of the place. The fact that I had been in a position to foregather with these experts, and possibly pick up a hint or two from their banjoist on fingering and execution, enabled me to bear with fortitude the prospect of being in a spot where I would probably have to meet the Dowager Lady Chuffnell and her son Seabury pretty frequently. I've often felt how tough it must be for poor old Chuffy having this pair of pustules popping in and out all the time. And in saying this, I'm looking straight at little Seabury, a child who should have been strangled at birth. I have no positive proof, but I've always been convinced that it was he who put the lizard in my bed the last time I stayed at the Hall. But, as I say, I was prepared to put up with this couple in return for the privilege of being in close communication with a really hot banjoist, and most of these nigger minstrel chaps can pick the strings like nobody's business. It wasn't therefore the thought of them which, as I returned to the flat to dress for dinner, was filling me with a strange moodiness. No, we Woosters can be honest with ourselves. What was giving me the pip was the reflection that Jeeves was about to go out of my life. There never had been anyone like Jeeves, I felt, as I climbed sombrely into the soup and fish, and there never would be. A wave of not unmanly sentiment poured over me. I was conscious of a pang, and when my toilet was completed, and I stood before the mirror surveying that perfectly pressed coat, those superbly creased trousers, I came to a swift decision. Abruptly I went into the sitting-room and leaned on the bell. "Jeeves," I said, "a word." "Yes, sir." "Jeeves," I said, "touching on our conversation this morning." "Yes, sir." "Jeeves," I said, "I've been thinking things over. I've come to the conclusion that we have both been hasty. Let's forget the past. You may stay on. It's very kind of you, sir, but are you still proposing to continue the study of that instrument?" I froze. "Yes, Jeeves, I am." "Then I fear, sir." It was enough. I nodded haughtily. "Very good, Jeeves, that's all. I will of course give you an excellent recommendation." "Thank you, sir. It won't be necessary. This afternoon I entered the employment of Lord Chuffnell." I started. "Did Chuffy sneak round here this afternoon and scoop you in?" "Yes, sir. I go with him to Chuffnell Regis in about a week's time." "You do you? Well, it may interest you to know that I repair to Chuffnell Regis tomorrow." "Indeed, sir." "Yes, I've taken a cottage there. We shall meet at Philippi, Jeeves." "Yes, sir." "Or am I thinking of some other spot?" "No, sir. Philippi is correct." "Very good, Jeeves." "Very good, sir." Such, then, is the sequence of events which led up to Bertram Wooster on the morning of July the 15th, standing at the door of Seaview Cottage, Chuffnell Regis, surveying the scene before him through the aromatic smoke of a meditative cigarette. Chapter 3. Re-enter the dead past. You know, the longer I live, the more I feel that the great wheeze in life is to be jolly well sure what you want, and not let yourself be put off by pals who think they know better than you do. When I'd announced at the Drones on my last day in the metropolis that I was retiring to this secluded spot for an indeterminate period, practically everybody had begged me, you might say with tears in their eyes, not to dream of doing such a cloth-headed thing. They said I should be bored stiff. But I'd carried on according to plan, and here I was on the 5th morning of my visit, absolutely in the pink and with no regrets whatsoever. The sun was shining, the sky was blue, and London seemed miles away, which it was, of course. I wouldn't be exaggerating if I said that a great peace enveloped the soul. A thing I never know when I'm telling a story is how much scenery to bung in. I've asked one or two scriveners of my acquaintance, and their views differ. A fellow I met at a cocktail party in Bloomsbury said that he was all for describing kitchen sinks and frowsty bedrooms and squalor generally, but the beauties of nature, no. Whereas Freddie Oker of the Drones, who does tales of pure love for the weeklies under the pen name of Alicia Seymour, once told me that he reckoned that flowery meadows in springtime alone were worth at least £100 a year to him. Personally, I've always rather barred long descriptions of the terrain, so I'll be on the brief side. As I stood there that morning, what the eye rested on was the following. There was a nice little splash of garden containing a bush, a tree, a couple of flower beds, a lily pond with a statue of a nude child with a bit of tummy on him, and to the right, a hedge. Across this hedge, Brinkley, my new man, was chatting with our neighbour, Police Sergeant Vowles, who seemed to have looked in with a view to selling eggs. There was another hedge straight ahead, with the garden gate in it, and over this one espied the placid waters of the harbour, which was much about the same as any other harbour, except that sometime during the night a whacking great yacht had rolled up and cast anchor in it. And of all the objects under my immediate advisement, I noted this yacht with the most pleasure and approval. White in colour, in size resembling a young liner, it lent a decided tone to the Chuffnell Regis foreshore. Well, such was the spreading prospect. Add a cat sniffing at a snail on the path, and me at the door smoking a gasper, and you have the complete picture. No, I'm wrong. Not quite the complete picture, because I'd left the old two-seater in the road, and I could just see the top part of it. And at this moment the summer stillness was broken by the tooting of its horn, and I buzzed to the gate with all possible speed for fear some fiend in human shape was scratching my paint. Arriving at destination, I found a small boy in the front seat, pensively squeezing the bulb, and was about to administer one to the side of the head when I recognized Chuffy's cousin, Seabury, and stayed the hand. "Hello," he said. "What ho?" I replied. My manner was reserved. The memory of that lizard in my bed still lingered. I don't know if you've ever leaped between the sheets all ready for a spot of sleep and received an unforeseen lizard up the left pyjama leg. It's an experience that puts its stamp on a man, and while, as I say, I had no legal proof that this young blighter had been the author of the outrage, I entertained suspicions that were tantamount to certainty. So now I not only spoke with a marked coldness, but also gave him the fairly frosty eye. It didn't seem to jar him. He continued to regard me with that supercilious gaze which had got him so disliked among the right-minded. He was a smallish, freckled kid with aeroplane ears, and he had a way of looking at you as if you were something he'd run into in the course of a slumming trip. In my rogues' gallery of repulsive small boys, I suppose he'd come about third, not quite so bad as my Aunt Agatha's son, young Toss, or Mr. Blumenfeld's junior, but well ahead of little Sebastian Moon, my Aunt Dahlia's bonzo, and the field. After staring at me for a moment, as if he were thinking that I'd changed for the worse since he last saw me, he spoke. "You ought to come to lunch." "Is Chuffy back, then?" "Yes." Well, of course, if Chuffy had returned, I was at his disposal. I shouted over the hedge to Brinkley that I'd be absent from the midday meal, and climbed into the car, and we rolled off. "When did he get back?" "Last night." "Shall we be lunching alone?" "No." "Who's going to be there?" "Mother and me and some people." "A party? I'd better go back and put on another suit." "No." "You think this one looks all right?" "No, I don't. I think it looks rotten, but there isn't time." This point settled, he passed into the silence for a while. A brooding kid. He came out of it to give me some local gossip. "Mother and I are living at the Hall again." "What?" "Yes. There's a smell at the Dower House." "Even though you've left it?" I said in my keen way. He wasn't amused. "You needn't try to be funny. If you really want to know, I expect it's my mice." "Your what?" "I've started breeding mice and puppies, and of course they niff a bit," he added in a dispassionate sort of way. "But Mother thinks it's the drains. Can you give me 5 shillings? I simply couldn't follow his train of thought. The way his conversation flitted about gave me that feeling you get in dreams sometimes. 5 shillings? 5 shillings. What do you mean, 5 shillings? I mean 5 shillings. I dare say, but what I want to know is, how have we suddenly got onto the subject? We were discussing mice, and you introduced this 5 shillings motif. I want 5 shillings. Admitting that you may possibly want that sum, why the dickens should I give it to you? For protection. What? Protection. What from? Just protection. You don't get any 5 shillings out of me. Oh, all right. He sat silent for a space. "Things happen to guys that don't kick in their protection money," he said dreamily. And on this note of mystery the conversation concluded, for we were moving up the drive of the Hall, and on the steps I perceived Chuffy standing. I stopped the car and got out. "Hello, Bertie," said Chuffy. "Welcome to Chuffnell Hall," I replied. I looked round. The kid had vanished. "I say, Chuffy," I said, "young blighted Seabury. What about him?" "What about him?" "Well, if you ask me, I should say he'd gone off his rocker. He's just been trying to touch me for 5 bob and babbling about protection." Chuffy laughed heartily, looking bronzed and fit. "Oh, that's his latest idea." "How do you mean?" "He's been seeing gangster films." The scales fell from my eyes. "He's turned racketeer?" "Yes, rather amusing. He goes round collecting protection money from everybody according to their means. Makes a good thing out of it, too. Enterprising kid. I'd pay up if I were you. "I have." I was shocked, not so much at the information that the foul child had given this additional evidence of a diseased mind, as that Chuffy should be exhibiting this attitude of amused tolerance. I eyed him keenly. Right from the start this morning I had thought his manner strange. Usually when you meet him he's brooding over his financial situation, and is rather apt to greet you with a lack-lustre eye and the careworn frown. He'd been like that 5 days ago in London. What then had caused him to beam all over the place like this, and even to go as far as to speak of little Seabury with what amounted to something perilously near to indulgent affection? I sensed a mystery, and decided to apply the acid test. "How's your Aunt Myrtle?" "She's fine." "Living at the Hall now, I hear?" "Yes." "Indefinitely?" "Oh, yes." It was enough. One of the things I must mention, which have always made poor old Chuffy's lot so hard, is his aunt's attitude toward him. She's never quite been able to get over that matter of the succession. Seabury, you see, wasn't the son of Chuffy's late uncle, the 4th Baron. He was simply something Lady Chuffnell had picked up en route in the course of a former marriage, and consequently didn't come under the head of what the peerage calls issue. And in matters of succession, if you aren't issue, you haven't a hope. When the 4th Baron pegged out accordingly, it was Chuffy who copped the title and the estates. All perfectly square and above board, of course, but you can't get women to see these things, and the relict's manner, Chuffy has often told me, was consistently unpleasant. She had a way of clasping Seabury in her arms and looking reproachfully at Chuffy as if he'd slipped over a fast one on mother and child. Nothing actually said, you understand, but her whole attitude that of a woman who considers she's been the victim of sharp practice. The result of this had been that the Dowager Lady Chuffnell wasn't one of Chuffy's best-loved buddies. Their relations had always been definitely strained, and what I'm driving at is that usually when you mention her name, a look of pain comes into Chuffy's clean-cut face, and he winces a little, as if you'd probed an old wound. Now he was actually smiling. Even that remark of mine about her living in the Hall hadn't jarred him. Obviously there were mysteries here. Something was being kept from Bertram. I tackled him squarely. "Chuffy," I said, "what does this mean?" "What does what mean?" "This bally cheeriness. You can't deceive me, not old Hawkeye Wooster. Come clean, my lad, something's up. What is all this ruddy happiness about?" He hesitated. For a moment he eyed me narrowly. "Can you keep a secret?" "No." "Well, it doesn't much matter, because it'll be in the Morning Post in a day or two." "Bertie," said Chuffy in a hushed voice, "do you know what's happened? I'm getting Aunt Myrtle off this season." "You mean somebody wants to marry her?" "I do." "Who is this half-wit?" "Your old friend Sir Roderick Glossop." I was stupefied. "What?" I was surprised too. "But old Glossop can't be contemplating matrimony." "Why not? He's been a widower more than 2 years. Oh, I dare say it's possible to make up some kind of a story for him, but what I mean is he doesn't seem to go with orange blossoms and wedding cake." "Well, there it is." "Well, I'm dashed. Yes. Well, there's one thing, Chuffy, old man. This means that little Seabury will be getting a really testing stepfather, and old Glossop just the stepson I could have wished him. Both have been asking for something on these lines for years. But fancy any woman being mad enough to link her lot with his. Our humble heroines. I wouldn't say the heroism was all on one side. About 50-50, I should call it. There's lots of good in this Glossop, Bertie." I couldn't accept this. It seemed to me loose thinking. "Aren't you going a bit far, old man? Admitted that he's taking your Aunt Myrtle off your hands. And Seabury, true, but even so, would you really say there was good in the old pest? Remember all the stories I've told you about him from time to time? They show him in a very dubious light." "Well, he's doing me a bit of good anyway. Do you know what it was he wanted to see me about so urgently that day in London?" "What?" "He's found an American he thinks he can sell the Hall to." "Not really?" "Yes. If all goes well, I should at last get rid of this blasted barracks and have a bit of money in my pocket. And all the credit will be due to Uncle Roderick, as I like to think of him. So you'll kindly refrain, Bertie, from nasty cracks at his expense, and in particular from mentioning him in the same breath with young Seabury. You must learn to love Uncle Roddy for my sake." I shook my head. "No, Chuffy, I fear I cannot recede from my position." "Well, go to hell, then," said Chuffy agreeably. "Personally, I regard him as a life-saver." "But are you sure this thing is going to come off? What would this fellow want with a place the size of the Hall?" "Oh, that part of it's simple enough. He's a great pal of old Glossop's, and the idea is that he shall put up the cash and let Glossop run the house as a sort of country club for his nerve patients." "Well, why doesn't old Glossop simply rent it from you?" "My dear ass, what sort of state do you suppose the place is in these days? You talk as if you could open it and step straight into it. Most of the rooms haven't been used for 40 years. It wants at least 15,000 quid spent on it to put it in repair. More, besides new furniture, fittings, and so on. If some millionaire like this chap doesn't take it on, I shall have it on my hands for the rest of my life." "Oh, he's a millionaire, is he?" "Yes, that part of it's all right. All I'm worrying about is getting his signature on the dotted line. Well, he's coming to lunch today, and it's going to be a good one, too. He's apt to soften up a good bit after a fat lunch, isn't he? Unless he's got dyspepsia. Many American millionaires have. This man of yours may be one of those fellows who can't get outside more than a glass of milk and a dog biscuit." Chuffy laughed jovially. "Not much. Not old Stoker." He suddenly began to leap about like a lamb in the springtime. "Hello, hello, hello." A car had drawn up at the steps and was discharging passengers. Passenger A was J. Washburn Stoker. Passenger B was his daughter Pauline. Passenger C was his young son Dwight, and Passenger D was Sir Roderick Glossop. Chapter 4. Annoying Predicament of Pauline Stoker. I must say I was pretty well a twitter. It was about as juicy a biff as I'd had for years. To have encountered this segment of the dead past in London would have been bad enough. Running into the gang down here like this with the prospect of a lengthy luncheon party ahead was a dashed sight worse. I removed the lid with as much courtly grace as I could muster up, but the face had coloured with embarrassment, and I was more or less gasping for air. Chuffy was being the genial host. "Hello, hello, hello. Here you all are. How are you, Mr. Stoker? How are you, Sir Roderick? Hello, Dwight. Good morning, Miss Stoker. May I introduce my friend Bertie Wooster? Mr. Stoker, my friend Bertie Wooster. Dwight, my friend Bertie Wooster. Miss Stoker, my friend Bertie Wooster. Sir Roderick Glossop, my friend Bertie... Oh, but you know each other already, don't you?" I was still under the ether. You'll agree that all this was enough to rattle any chap. I surveyed the mob. Old Stoker was glaring at me, old Glossop was glaring at me, young Dwight was staring at me, only Pauline appeared to find no awkwardness in the situation. She was as cool as an oyster on the half-shell and as chirpy as a spring breeze. We might have been meeting by appointment. Where Bertram could find only a tentative pip-pip, she bounded forward full of speech and grabbed the old hand warmly. "Well, well, well, old Colonel Wooster in person. Fancy finding you here, Bertie. I called you up in London, but they told me you'd left." Yes, I came down here." "I see you did, you little blob of sunshine. Well, sir, this has certainly made my day. You're looking fine, Bertie. Don't you think he's looking fine, father?" Old Stoker appeared reluctant to set himself up as a judge of male beauty. He made a noise like a pig swallowing half a cabbage, but refused to commit himself further. Dwight, a solemn child, was drinking me in silence. Sir Roderick, who'd turned purple, was now fading away to a lighter shade, but still looked as if his finer feelings had sustained a considerable wallop. At this moment, however, the Dowager Lady Chuffnell came out. She was one of those powerful women who look like female masters of hounds, and she handled the mob scene with quiet efficiency. Before I knew where I was, the whole gang had gone indoors, and I was alone with Chuffy. He was staring at me in an odd manner and doing a bit of lower lip biting. "I didn't know you knew these people, Bertie." "I met them in New York." "You saw something of Miss Stoker there?" "A little." "Only a little?" "Well, quite a little." "I thought her manner seemed rather warm." "Oh, no, about normal." "I should have imagined you were great friends." "Oh, no, just fairly pally. She goes on like that with everyone." "She does?" "Oh, yes, big-hearted, you see. She's got a delightful, impulsive, generous, spontaneous, genuine nature, hasn't she?" "Absolutely. Beautiful girl, Bertie." "Oh, very. And charming." "Oh, most. In fact, attractive." "Oh, quite. I saw a good deal of her in London." Yes, we went to the zoo and Madame Tussauds together. I see, and what does she seem to feel about this buying the house binge? She seems all for it. Tell me, laddie, I said, anxious to get off the current subject, how do the prospects look? He knitted the Chuffnell brow. Sometimes good, sometimes not. I see, uncertain, I understand. This Stoker chap makes me nervous. He's friendly enough as a general rule, but I can't help feeling that any moment he may fly off the handle and scratch the entire fixture. You can't tell me if there are any special subjects to avoid when talking to him, can you? Special subjects? Well, you know how it is with a stranger. You say it's a fine day, and he goes all white and tense because you've reminded him that it was on a fine day that his wife eloped with a chauffeur. I considered. Well, if I were you, I said, I wouldn't harp too much on the topic of Bertie Wooster. I mean, if you were thinking of singing my praises, I wasn't. Well, don't. He doesn't like me. Why not? Just one of these unreasonable antipathies. And I was thinking, old man, if it's all the same to you, it might be better if I didn't join the throng at the luncheon table. You can tell your aunt I've got a headache. Well, if the sight of you is going to infuriate him, what makes him bar you so much? I don't know. Well, I'm glad you told me. You'd better sneak off. I will. And I suppose I ought to be joining the others. He went indoors, and I started to take a turn or two up and down the gravel. I was glad to be alone. I wished to muse upon this matter of his attitude towards Pauline Stoker. I wonder if you'd mind just going back a bit and running the mental eye over that part of our conversation which had to do with the girl. Anything strike you about it? No? Oh, well, to get the full significance, of course, you ought to have been there and observed him. I'm a man who can read faces, and Chuffy's had seemed to me highly suggestive. Not only had its expression, as he spoke of Pauline, been that of a stuffed frog with a touch of the soul's awakening about it, but it had also turned a fairly deepish crimson in colour. The tip of the nose had wiggled, and there'd been embarrassment in the manner. The result being that I'd become firmly convinced that the old schoolmate had copped it properly. Quick work, of course, seeing that he'd only known the adored object a few days, but Chuffy's like that. A man of impulse and hot-blooded impetuosity. You find the girl, and he does the rest. Well, if that was so, it was all right with me. Nothing of the dog in the manger about Bertram. As far as I was concerned, Pauline Stoker could hitch up with anyone she liked, and she would draw a hearty go-to-it from the discarded suitor. You know how it is on quiet reflection in these affairs. For a time the broken heart, and then suddenly the healing conviction that one is jolly well out of it. I could still see that Pauline was one of the most beautiful girls I'd ever met, but of the ancient fire which had caused me to bung my heart at her feet that night at the plaza, there remained not... Analyzing this, if analyzing is the word I want, I came to the conclusion that this changed outlook was due to the fact that she was so dashed dynamic. Unquestionably an eyeful, Pauline Stoker had the grave defect of being one of those girls who want you to come and swim a mile before breakfast and rout you out when you're trying to snatch a wink of sleep after lunch for a merry 5 sets of tennis. And now that the scales had fallen from my eyes, I could see that what I required for the role of Mrs. Bertram Wooster was something rather more on the lines of Janet Gaynor. But in Chuffy's case these objections fell to the ground. He, you see, is very much on the dynamic side himself. He rides, swims, shoots, chivies foxes with loud cries, and generally bustles about. He and this P. Stoker would make the perfect pair, and I felt that if there was anything I could do to push the thing along, it should be done unstintedly. So, when at this point I saw Pauline come out of the house and bear down on me, obviously with a view to exchanging notes and picking up the old threads and what-not, I didn't leg it, but greeted her with a bright "What-ho!" and allowed her to steer me into the shelter of a path that led through the rhododendron shrubbery. All of which goes to show to what lengths a Wooster will proceed when it's a question of helping a pal, because the last thing I really wanted was to be closeted with this girl. The first shock of meeting her was over, but I was still feeling far from yeasty at the prospect of a heart-to-heart talk. As our relations had been severed by post, and the last time we'd foregathered we'd been an engaged couple, I wasn't quite sure what was the correct note to strike. However, the thought that I might be able to put in a word for poor old Chuffy nerved me to the ordeal, and we parked ourselves on a rustic bench and got down to the agenda. "How perfectly extraordinary finding you here, Bertie," she began. "What are you doing in these parts?" "I'm temporarily in retirement," I replied, pleased to find the conversational exchanges opening on what I might call an unemotional note. "I needed a place where I could play the banjolele in solitude, and I took this cottage." "What cottage?" "I've got a cottage down by the harbour." "You must have been surprised to see us." "I was. More surprised than pleased, eh?" "Well, of course, old thing, I'm always delighted to see you, but when it comes to your father and old Glossop, he's not one of your greatest admirers, is he?" "By the way, Bertie, do you keep cats in the bedroom?" I stiffened a little. "There have been cats in my bedroom, but the incident to which you allude is one that is susceptible of a ready, 'All right, never mind. Take it as read.' But you ought to have seen Father's face when he heard about it. Talking of Father's face, I should get a big laugh if I saw it now." I couldn't follow this. Goodness knows I'm as fond of a chuckle as the next man, but J. Washburn Stoker's face had never made me so much as smile. He was a cove who always reminded me of a pirate of the Spanish Main, a massive blighter and piercing-eyed to boot. So far from laughing at the sight of him, I'd never yet failed to feel absolutely spineless in his presence. If he suddenly came round the corner, and found us with our heads together like this, he's convinced that I'm still pining for you. "You don't mean that." "I do, honestly." "But dash it, it's true, I tell you. He looks on himself as the stern Victorian father who's parted the young lovers and has got to exercise ceaseless vigilance to keep them from getting together again, little knowing that you never had a happier moment in your life than when you got my letter." "No, I say." "Bertie, be honest. You know you were delighted." "Well, I wouldn't say that." "You don't have to. Mother knows." "No, dash it, really. I wish you wouldn't talk like that. I always esteemed you most highly." "You did what? Where did you pick up these expressions?" "Well, I suppose from Jeeves, mostly. My late man. He had a fine vocabulary." "When you say late, do you mean he's dead? Or just unpunctual?" "He's left me. He didn't like my playing the banjolele. Words passed, and he's now with Chuffy." "Chuffy?" "Lord Chuffnell." "Oh." There was a pause. She sat listening for a moment to a couple of birds who were having an argument in a nearby tree. "Have you known Lord Chuffnell long?" she asked. "Oh, rather." "You're great friends?" "Bosom is the mot juste." "Good. I hoped you were. I wanted to talk to you about him. I can confide in you, can't I, Bertie?" "Of course." "I knew I could. That's the comfort of having been engaged to a man. When you break it off, you feel such a sister." "I don't regard you as a blister at all," I said warmly. "You had a perfect right." "Not blister, sister." "Oh, sister. You mean you look on me as a brother?" "Yes, as a brother. How quick you are. And I want you to be very brotherly now. Tell me about Marmaduke." "I don't think I know him." "Lord Chuffnell, idiot." "Is his name Marmaduke?" "Well, well, how true it is that one doesn't know how the other half of the world lives, what? Marmaduke," I said, laughing heartily. "I remember he was always evasive and secretive about it at school." She seemed annoyed. "It's a beautiful name." I shot one of my swift, keen glances at her. This, I felt, must mean something. Nobody would say Marmaduke was a beautiful name wantonly and without good reason. And sure enough, the eyes were gleaming and the epidermis a pretty pink. "Hello," I said. "Hello, hello, hello, hello." Her demeanor was defiant. All right, she said. "Less of the Sherlock stuff. I'm not trying to hide anything. I was just going to tell you. You love this excuse me, this Marmaduke." "I'm crazy about him." "Good. Well, if what you say, don't you worship the way his hair fluffs up behind?" "I've better things to do than go about staring at the back of Chuffy's head. But as I was about to remark, if what you say is really so, be prepared for tidings of great joy. I'm a pretty close observer, and a certain bulbous look in the old boy's eyes when a recent conversation happened to turn in your direction has convinced me that he's deeply enamored of you." She wiggled her shoulder impatiently, and in a rather peevish manner hoofed a passing earwig with a shapely foot. "I know that, you chump. Do you think a girl can't tell?" I was frankly nonplussed. "Well, if he loves you and you love him, I fail to comprehend what you're beefing about." Why, can't you understand? He's obviously dippy about me, but not a yip from him. He won't speak? Not a syllable. Well, why should he? Surely you realize that there's a certain decency in these matters, a certain decorum. Naturally, he wouldn't say anything yet. Dash it, give a man a chance. He's only known you 5 days. I sometimes feel that he was a king in Babylon when I was a Christian slave. What makes you think that? I just do. Well, you know best, of course. Very doubtful, I should have said myself. And anyway, what do you want me to do about it? Well, you're a friend of his. You could give him a hint. You could tell him there's no need for cold feet. It isn't cold feet, it's delicacy. As I just explained, we men have our code in these matters. We may fall in love pretty nippily, but after that we consider it decorous to backpedal a while. We are the parfait gentle mites, and we feel that it ill beseems us to make a beeline for a girl like a man charging into a railway restaurant for a bowl of soup. What utter nonsense! You asked me to marry you after you'd known me for 2 weeks. Ah, but there you were dealing with one of the wild Woosters. Well, I can't see. Yes, I said, proceed. You have our ear. But she was looking past me at something to the southeast, and turning, I perceived that we were no longer alone. There, standing in an attitude of respectful courtliness, with the sunshine playing upon his finely chiselled features, was Jeeves. Chapter 5. Bertie takes things in hand. I nodded affably. This man and I might have severed our professional relations, but a Wooster is always debonair. Ah, Jeeves. Good afternoon, sir. Pauline appeared interested. Is this Jeeves? This is Jeeves. So you don't like Mr. Wooster's banjolele? No, miss. I preferred that this delicate matter be not discussed, and it may be, in consequence, that I spoke a little curtly. Well, Jeeves, what is it? Mr. Stoker, sir. He's inquiring after Miss Stoker's whereabouts. Well, of course, there's always that old one about being at the wash, but this seemed to me neither the time nor the place. I turned to the girl with an air of courteous dismissal. You'd better push along. I suppose so. You won't forget what I said. The matter, I assured her, shall have my prompt attention. She legged it, and Jeeves and I were alone together in the great solitude. I lit a cigarette nonchalantly. Well, Jeeves? Sir? I mean to say, we meet again. Yes, sir. Philippi, what? Yes, sir. I hope you're getting on all right with Chuffy. Everything is most pleasant, sir. I trust your new personal attendant is giving satisfaction? Oh, quite. A sterling fellow. I'm extremely gratified to hear it, sir. There was a pause. Jeeves, I said. A rummy thing. It had been my intention, after exchanging these few civilities, to nod carelessly and leave the fellow, but it's so dashed difficult to break the habit of years. I mean to say, here was I, and here was Jeeves, and a problem had been put up to me of just the type concerning which I'd always been wont to seek his advice and counsel. And now something seemed to keep me rooted to the spot. And instead of being aloof and distant, and passing on with a slight inclination of the head, which, as I say, I had been planning, I found myself irresistibly impelled to consult him, just as if there'd been no rift at all. Jeeves, I said. Sir? I should rather like, if you have a moment to spare, to split a word with you. Certainly, sir. I wish to canvass your views regarding old Chuffy. Very good, sir. His face was wearing that expression of quiet intelligence combined with a feudal desire to oblige, which I'd so often seen upon it, and I hesitated no longer. You'll agree with me that something's got to be done about the 5th Baron, I take it. I beg your pardon, sir? I was impatient with this. What the dickens is the word I want? Come, Jeeves, you know what I mean as well as I do. A little less coyness and a bit more of the old rallying round spirit. You can't tell me you've been in his employment for nearly a week without observing and deducing and forming your conclusions. Am I correct in supposing, sir, that you're alluding to his lordship's feelings towards Miss Stoker? Exactly. I am, of course, aware that his lordship is experiencing for the young lady a sentiment deeper and warmer than that of ordinary friendship, sir. Would I be going too far if I said that he was potty about her? No, sir. The expression would meet the facts of the case quite adequately. Very well, then. Now, mark this. She, too, loves Jeeves. Indeed, sir. She was telling me so specifically when you came along. She confessed herself dippy about the man, and she's very upset, poor fish, extremely upset. Her feminine intuition has enabled her to read his secret. She detects the love light in his eyes, and she's all for it. And what's worrying her is that he doesn't tell his love, but lets concealment like what, Jeeves? A worm in the bud, sir. Feed on something. Damask cheek, sir. Damask? You sure? Quite sure, sir. Well then, what on earth is it all about? He loves her, she loves him, so what's the snag? In conversing with her just now, I advanced the theory that what was holding him back was delicacy, but I didn't really believe it. I know Chuffy. A swift performer, if ever there was one. If he didn't propose to a girl by the end of the first week, he would think he was losing his grip. Yet now look at him, missing on every cylinder. Why? His lordship is a gentleman of scruples, sir. How do you mean? He feels that being of straitened means himself, he hasn't the right to propose a marriage to a young lady as wealthy as Miss Stoker. But dash it, love laughs at... No, it doesn't. It's at locksmiths, isn't it? At locksmiths, yes, sir. Besides, she isn't as rich as all that, just comfortably off, I should have said. No, sir. Mr. Stoker's fortune amounts to as much as $50 million. What? You're talking through your hat, Jeeves. No, sir. I understand that that was the sum which he inherited recently under the will of the late Mr. George Stoker. I was stunned. Good Lord, Jeeves. Has second cousin George kicked the bucket? Yes, sir. And left all his money to old Stoker? Yes, sir. Now I see. Now I understand. This explains everything. I was wondering how he managed to be going about buying vast estates. The yacht in the harbour is his, of course. Yes, sir. Well, well, well. But dash it, George must have had nearer relations. Yes, sir. I understand that he disliked them all. You know about him, then? Yes, sir. I saw a good deal of his personal attendant when we were in New York. A man named Benstead. He was potty, wasn't he? Certainly extremely eccentric, sir. Any chance of one of those other relations contesting the will? I don't imagine so, sir. But in such a case, Mr. Stoker would rely on Sir Roderick Glossop, of course, to testify that the late Mr. Stoker, while possibly somewhat individual in his habits, was nevertheless perfectly sane. The testimony of so eminent a mental specialist as Sir Roderick would be unassailable. You mean he'd say, why shouldn't a fellow walk about on his hands if he wants to? Saves shoe leather and so forth. Exactly, sir. Then there's no chance of Miss Stoker ever being anything except the heiress of a bird with $50 million shoved away behind the brick in the fireplace. Virtually none, sir. I brooded on this. And unless old Stoker buys the whore, Chuffy will continue to be Kid Lazarus, the man without a bean. One spots the drama of the situation, and yet why, Jeeves? Why all this fuss about money? After all, plenty of bust blokes have married oofy girls before now. Yes, sir, but his lordship is a gentleman of peculiar views on this particular matter. I mused. Yes, I reflected, it was quite true. Chuffy is a fellow who's always been odd on the subject of money. It's something to do with the pride of the Chuffnells, I suppose. I know that for years and years I've been trying to lend him of my plenty, but he's always steadfastly refused to put the bite on me. It's difficult, I said. One fails for the moment to see the way out. And yet you may be wrong, Jeeves. After all, you're only guessing. No, sir. His lordship did me the honour to confide in me. Really? How did the subject come up? Mr. Stoker had expressed a wish that I should enter his employment. He approached me in the matter. I informed his lordship. His lordship instructed me to hold out hopes. You can't mean that he wants you to leave him and go to old Stoker? No, sir. He specifically stated the reverse, with a good deal of vehemence, but he was anxious that I shouldn't break off the negotiations with a definite refusal until the sale of Chuffnell Hall had gone through. I see. I follow his strategy. He wanted you to jolly old Stoker along and keep him sweetened till he'd signed the fatal papers. Precisely, sir. It was this conversation that led up to his lordship revealing his personal position as concerns Miss Stoker. Until his financial status is sufficiently sound to justify him in doing so, his self-respect will not permit him to propose marriage to the young lady. Silly ass! I wouldn't have ventured to employ precisely that term myself, sir, but I confess that I regard his lordship's attitude as somewhat hyper-quixotic. We must talk him out of it. Impossible, sir, I fear. I endeavoured to do so myself, but my arguments were of no avail. His lordship has a complex. A what? A complex, sir. It seems that he once witnessed a musical comedy in which one of the dramatis personae was a certain impecunious peer, Lord Wat-Watley, who was endeavouring to marry an American heiress, and this individual appears to have made a lasting impression in his mind. He stated to me in the most unequivocal terms that he refused to place himself in a position where comparisons might be instituted. But suppose the sale of the house doesn't go through? In that case, I fear, sir, the damask cheek will continue to do business at the old stand indefinitely? Exactly, sir. You really are sure it is damask? Yes, sir. But it doesn't seem to mean anything. An archaic adjective, sir. I fancy it's intended to signify a healthy complexion. Well, Chuffy's got that. Yes, sir. But what good's a healthy complexion if you don't get the girl? Very true, sir. What would you advise, Jeeves? I fear I have nothing to suggest at the moment, sir. Come, Jeeves. No, sir, the difficulty being essentially a psychological one, I find myself somewhat baffled. As long as the image of Lord Wat-Watley persists in his lordship's consciousness, I fear that there's nothing to be done. Of course there is. Why this strange weakness, Jeeves? It's not like you. Obviously the fellow must be shoved over the brink. I don't quite follow you, sir. Of course you do. The thing's perfectly clear. Here's old Chuffy for the nonce just hanging dumbly around the girl. What he needs is a jolt. If he thought there was grave danger of some other bloke scooping her up, wouldn't that make him forget these dashed silly ideas of his and charge in breathing fire through the nostrils? Jealousy is undoubtedly an extremely powerful motivating force, sir. Do you know what I'm going to do, Jeeves? No, sir. I'm going to kiss Miss Stoker and take care that Chuffy sees me do it. Really, sir, I shouldn't advocate peace, Jeeves. I've got the whole thing taped out. It came to me in a flash as we were talking. After lunch, I shall draw Miss Stoker aside to this seat. You will arrange that Chuffy follows her. Waiting till I see the whites of his eyes, I shall fold her in a close embrace. If that doesn't work, nothing will. I consider that you'll be taking a decided risk, sir. His lordship is in a highly emotional condition. Well, a Wooster can put up with a punch in the eye for the sake of a pal. No, Jeeves, I desire no further discussion. The thing is settled. All that remains is to fix the times. I suppose lunch would be over by about 2:30. Incidentally, I wasn't going in to lunch myself. No, sir. No, I can't face that gang. I shall remain out here. Bring me some sandwiches and a half-bot of the best. Very good, sir. And by the way, the French windows of the dining-room will be open in weather like this. Sneak near them from time to time during lunch and bend an ear. Something of importance might be said. Very good, sir. Put plenty of mustard on the sandwiches. Very good, sir. And at 2:30 inform Miss Stoker that I would like a word with her. And at 2:31 inform Lord Chuffnell that she'd like a word with him. The rest you can leave to me. Very good, sir. Chapter 6. Complications set in. There was a fairly longish interval before Jeeves returned with the foodstuffs. I threw myself on them with some abandon. You've been the dickens of a time. I followed your instructions, sir, and listened at the dining-room window. Oh, with what result? I wasn't able to hear anything that gave an indication of Mr. Stoker's views regarding the purchase of the house, but he appeared in an affable mood. That's promising. Full of sparkle, eh? Yes, sir. He was inviting all those present to a party on his yacht. He's staying on here, then? For some little time, I gathered, sir. Apparently something has gone wrong with the propeller of the vessel. He probably gave it one of his looks. And this party? It appears that it is Master Dwight Stoker's birthday tomorrow, sir. The party, I gathered, was to be in celebration of the event. And was the suggestion well received? Extremely, sir. Though Master Seabury appeared to experience a certain chagrin at Master Dwight's somewhat arrogant assertion that he betted this was the first time that Master Seabury had ever so much as smelled a yacht. What did he say? He retorted that he'd been on millions of yachts. Indeed, if I'm not mistaken, trillions was the word he employed. And then, from a peculiar noise which he made with his mouth, I received the impression that Master Dwight was sceptical concerning this claim, but at this moment Mr. Stoker threw oil upon the troubled waters by announcing his intention of hiring the troupe of Negro minstrels to perform at the party. It appears that his lordship had mentioned their presence in Chufnell Regis. And that went well? Very well indeed, sir. Except that Master Seabury said that he betted Master Dwight had never heard negro minstrels before. From a remark passed shortly afterwards by her ladyship, I gathered that Master Dwight had then thrown a potato at Master Seabury, and for a while a certain unpleasantness seemed to threaten. I clicked my tongue. I wish somebody would muzzle those kids and chain them up. They'll queer the whole thing. The imbroglio was fortunately short-lived, sir. I left the whole company on what appeared to be the most amicable terms. Master Dwight protested that his hand had slipped, and the apology was gracefully received. Well, bustle back and see if you can hear some more. Very good, sir. I finished my sandwiches and half-bot and lit a cigarette, wishing that I'd told Jeeves to bring me some coffee. But you don't have to tell Jeeves things like that. In due course up he rolled with the steaming cupful. A luncheon has just concluded, sir. Ah, did you see Miss Stoker? Yes, sir. I informed her that you desired a word with her, and she'll be here shortly. Why not now? His lordship engaged her in conversation immediately after I'd given her your message. Had you told him to come here too? Yes, sir. No good, Jeeves. I see a flaw. They'll arrive together. No, sir. On observing his lordship making in this direction, I can easily detain him for a moment on some matter, such as, I have long been desirous of canvassing his lordship's views as to the desirability of purchasing some new socks. You know what you are when you get onto the subject of socks, Jeeves. Don't get carried away and keep him talking for an hour. I want to get this thing over. I quite understand, sir. When did you see Miss Stoker? About a quarter of an hour ago, sir. Funny she doesn't turn up. I wonder what they're talking about. I couldn't say, sir. Ah! I had observed a gleam of white among the bushes. The next moment the girl appeared. She was looking more beautiful than ever, her eyes in particular shining like twin stars. Nevertheless, I didn't waver in my view that I was jolly glad it was Chuffy who, if all went well, was going to marry her and not me. Odd how a girl may be a perfect knockout, and yet one can still feel that to be married to her would give one the absolute pip. That's life, I suppose. Hello, Bertie, said Pauline. What's all this about you having a headache? You seem to have been doing yourself pretty well in spite of it. I found I could peck a bit. You'd better take these things back, Jeeves. Very good, sir. And you won't forget that if his lordship should want me, I'm here. No, sir. He gathered up the plate, cup, and bottle and disappeared. And whether I was sorry to see him go or not, I couldn't have said. I was feeling a good deal worked up, taut, if you know what I mean, on edge, tense. The best idea I can give you of my emotions at this juncture is to say that they rather resembled those I had once felt when starting to sing Sonny Boy at Beefy Bingham's church lads' entertainment down in the East End. Pauline had grabbed my arm and was beginning to make some species of communication. "Bertie," she was saying, but at this point I caught sight of Chuffy's head over a shrub, and I felt that the moment had come to act. It was one of those things that want doing quickly or not at all. I waited no longer. Folding the girl in my arms, I got home on her right eyebrow. It wasn't one of my best, I'll admit, but it was a kiss within the meaning of the act, and I fancied that it ought to produce results. And so, no doubt, it would have done, had the fellow who entered left at this critical point been Chuffy. But it wasn't. What with only being able to catch a fleeting glimpse of a Homburg hat through the foliage, I appeared to have made an unfortunate floater. The bloke who now stood before us was old Pop Stoker, and I confess I found myself a prey to a certain embarrassment. It was, you must admit, not a little awkward. Here was an anxious father who combined with a strong distaste for Bertram Wooster the notion that his daughter was madly in love with him, and the first thing he saw when he took an after-lunch saunter was the two of us locked in a close embrace. It was enough to give any parent the jitters, and I wasn't surprised that his demeanour was that of stout Cortez staring at the Pacific. A fellow with 50 millions in his kick doesn't have to wear the mask. If he wants to give any selected bloke a nasty look, he gives him a nasty look. He was giving me one now. It was a look that had both alarm and anguish in it, and I realized that Pauline's statement regarding his views had been accurate. Fortunately, the thing didn't go beyond looks. Say what you like against civilization, it comes in dashed handy in a crisis like this. It may be a purely artificial code that keeps a father from hoofing his daughter's kisser when they are fellow guests at a house, but at this moment I felt that I could do with all the purely artificial codes that were going. There was just one instant when his foot twitched, and it seemed as if what you might call the primitive J. Washburn Stoker was about to find self-expression. Then civilization prevailed. With one more of those looks he collected Pauline, and the next moment I was alone and at liberty to think the thing over. And it was as I was doing so, with the help of a soothing cigarette, that Chuffy bounded into my little sylvan glade. He too appeared to have something on his mind, for he was noticeably pop-eyed. "Look here, Bertie," he began without preamble, "what's all this I hear?" "Well, what's all what you hear, old man?" "Why didn't you tell me you'd been engaged to Pauline Stoker?" I raised an eyebrow. It seemed to me that a touch of the iron hand would not be out of place. If you see a fellow's going to be austere with you, there's nothing like jumping in and being austere with him first. "I fail to understand you, Chuffnell," I said stiffly. "Did you expect me to send you a postcard?" "You could have told me this morning." "I saw no reason to do so." "How did you hear about it, anyhow?" "Sir Roderick Glossop happened to mention it." "Oh, he did he? Well, he's an authority on the subject. He was the bird who broke it off." "What do you mean?" "He happened to be in New York at the time, and it was the work of a moment with him to tap old Stoker on the chest and urge him to give me the push. The whole thing didn't last more than 48 hours from kick-off to finish." Chuffy eyed me narrowly. "You swear that?" "Certainly." "Only 48 hours?" "Less." "And there's nothing between you now?" His demeanour wasn't matey, and I began to perceive that in arranging that Stoker and not he should be the witness of the recent embrace, the guardian angel of the Woosters had acted dashed shrewdly. "Nothing." "You're sure?" "Nothing whatever. So charge in, Chuffy, old man," I said, patting his shoulder in an elder brotherly manner. "Follow the dictates of the old heart and fear nothing. The girl's potty about you." "Who told you that?" "She did, herself, in person." "She does really love me?" "Passionately, I gathered." A look of relief came into the old egg's careworn face. He passed a hand over the forehead and generally relaxed. "Oh, well, that's all right, then. Sorry if I appeared a bit rattled for a moment. When a fellow's just got engaged to a girl, it's rather a jar to find that she was engaged to somebody else about 2 months before." I was astounded. "Are you engaged? Since when?" "Since shortly after lunch." "But how about Wat Whatley?" "Who told you about Wat Whatley?" "Jeeves. He said that the shadow of Wat Whatley brooded over you like a cloud." "Jeeves talks too much. As a matter of fact, Wat Whatley didn't enter into the matter at all. Immediately before I fixed things up with Pauline, old Stoker told me he decided to buy the house." "Really?" "Absolutely. I think it was the port that did it. I lushed him up on the last of the 85. "You couldn't have done a wiser thing. Your own idea?" "No, Jeeves's." I couldn't restrain a wistful sigh. "Jeeves is a wonder, a marvel. What a brain! Size 9 1/4, I should say. He eats a lot of fish. What a pity he has no ear for music," I said moodily. Then I stifled regret and tried to think not of my bereavement, but of Chuffy's bit of luck. "Well, this is fine," I said heartily. "I hope you'll be very, very happy. I can honestly say that I always look on Pauline as one of the nicest girls I was ever engaged to." "I wish you would stop harping on that engagement." "Quite. I'm trying to forget that you ever were engaged to her." "Quite, quite. When I think that you were once in a position to—" "But I wasn't." "Never lose sight of the fact that the betrothal only lasted 2 days, during both of which I was in bed with a nasty cold." "But when she accepted you, you must have—" "No, I didn't. A waiter came into the room with a tray of beef sandwiches, and the moment passed." "Then you never—" "Absolutely never." "She must have had a great time being engaged to you." "One round of excitement. I wonder what on earth made her accept you." This had puzzled me, too, more than a little. I can only suppose that there's something in me that strikes a chord in the bosoms of these forceful females. I've known it happen before, on the occasion when I got engaged to Honoria Glossop. "I once consulted a knowledgeable pal," I said, "and his theory was that the sight of me hanging about like a loony sheep awoke the maternal instinct in woman. There may be something in this. "Possibly," said Chuffy. "Well, I'll be getting along. I suppose Stoker will want to talk to me about the house. You coming?" "No, thanks. The fact of the matter is, old man, I'm not so dashed keen on mingling with your old troop. I could stand your Aunt Myrtle. I could even stand little Seabury, but add Stoker and Glossop, and the going becomes too sticky for Bertram. I shall take a stroll about the estate." This demesne or seat of Chuffy's was a topping place for a stroll, and I should have thought he'd have had a certain regret at the thought that it was passing out of his hands to become a private loony bin. But I suppose when you've been cooped up in a house for years with an Aunt Myrtle and a cousin Seabury for next-door neighbours, you lose your taste for it. I spent an agreeable 2 hours messing about, and it was well along into the late afternoon when the imperative need for a cup of tea sent me sauntering round to the back premises where I anticipated finding Jeeves. A scullery maid of sorts directed me to his quarters, and I sat down in the comfortable certainty that ere long the steaming pot and buttered toast would be to the fore. The happy ending of which Chuffy had recently apprised me had induced contentment, and a nice hot cup and slab of toast would, I felt, just top the thing off. "In fact, Jeeves," I said, "even muffins would scarcely be out of place on an occasion like this. I find it very gratifying to reflect that Chuffy's storm-tossed soul has at last come safely into harbour. You heard about Stoker promising to buy the house?" "Yes, sir." "And the engagement?" "Yes, sir." "I suppose old Chuffy's feeling great?" "Not altogether, sir." "Huh?" "No, sir. I regret to say that there's been something in the nature of a hitch." "What? They can't have quarrelled already?" "No, sir. His lordship's relations with Miss Stoker continue uniformly cordial. It's with Mr. Stoker that he's on distant terms." "Oh, my God!" "Yes, sir." "What happened?" "The origin of the trouble was a physical contest between Master Dwight Stoker and Master Seabury, sir. You may recollect my mentioning that during luncheon there appeared to be a lack of perfect sympathy between the two young gentlemen. But you said—" "Yes, sir. Matters were smoothed over at the time, but they came to a head again some 40 minutes after the conclusion of the meal. The young gentlemen had gone off together to the small morning-room, and there, it appears, Master Seabury endeavoured to exact from Master Dwight the sum of 1 shilling and 6pence for what he termed protection." "Oh, golly!" "Yes, sir. Master Dwight, I gathered, declined in a somewhat high-spirited manner to kick in, as I believe the expression is, and one word led to another, with the result that at about 3:30 sounds indicative of a brawl were heard proceeding from the morning-room, and the senior members of the party, repairing thither, discovered the young gentleman on the floor, surrounded by the debris of a china cabinet, which they'd overturned in their struggle. At the moment of their arrival, Master Dwight appeared to be having somewhat the better of the exchanges, for he was seated on Master Seabury's chest, bumping his head on the carpet. It'll give you some idea of the grave concern which this narrative was occasioning me, when I say that my emotion on hearing this was not a sober ecstasy at the thought that, after all these long years, somebody had at last been treating little Seabury's head as it ought to be treated, but a sickening dismay. I could see whither all this was tending. "Gosh, Jeeves." "Yes, sir." "And then?" "The action then became, as it were, general, sir." "The old brigade lent a hand?" "Yes, sir, the initiative being taken by Lady Chufnell." I moaned. "It would be, Jeeves. Chuffy's often told me that her attitude towards Seabury resembles that of a tigress towards its cub. In Seabury's interest she's always been inclined to stamp on the world's toes and give it the elbow. I've heard Chuffy's voice absolutely quiver when describing the way in which, in the days before he contrived to shoot them off to the dower house, and they were still living at the Hall, she always collared the best egg at breakfast and slipped it to the little one. But go on." "On witnessing the position of affairs, her ladyship uttered a sharp cry and struck Master Dwight with considerable force on the right ear. Upon which, of course—" "Precisely, sir. Mr. Stoker, espousing the cause of his son, aimed a powerful kick at Master Seabury." "And got him, Jeeves? Tell me he got him." "Yes, sir. Master Seabury was rising at the moment, and his attitude was exceptionally well adapted for the receipt of such an attack. At the next moment, a heated altercation had broken out between her ladyship and Mr. Stoker. Her ladyship called to Sir Roderick for support, and he, somewhat reluctantly it appeared to me, proceeded to take Mr. Stoker to task for the assault. High words ensued, and the upshot of it was that Mr. Stoker, with a good deal of warmth, informed Sir Roderick that if he supposed that he, Mr. Stoker, intended to purchase Chufnell Hall after what had occurred, he, Sir Roderick, was in grave error. I buried the head in the hands. Upon this, "Yes, get it over, Jeeves. I can see what's coming." "Yes, sir. I agree with you that the whole affair has something of the dark inevitability of Greek tragedy." Upon this, his lordship, who had been an agitated auditor, gave vent to a startled exclamation and urged Mr. Stoker to disclaim these words. It was his lordship's view that Mr. Stoker, having given his promise to purchase Chufnell Hall, couldn't, as an honourable man, recede from his obligation. Upon Mr. Stoker replying that he didn't care what he had promised or what he had not promised, and continuing to asseverate that not a penny of his money should be expended in the direction indicated, his lordship, I regret to say, became somewhat unguarded in his speech. I moaned another bar or two. I knew what old Chuffy was capable of when his generous nature was stirred. I'd heard him coaching his college boat at Oxford. He ticked Stoker off, with considerable vigour, sir, stating in an extremely candid manner his opinion of the latter's character, commercial probity, and even appearance. That must have put the lid on it. It did appear to create a certain coldness, sir. And then? That terminated the distressing scene, sir. Mr. Stoker returned to the yacht with Miss Stoker and Master Dwight. Sir Roderick has gone to secure accommodation for himself at the local inn. Lady Chufnell is applying arnica to Master Seabury in his bedroom. His lordship, I believe, is taking the dog for a run in the West Park. I mused. When all this happened, had Chuffy told Stoker he wanted to marry Miss Stoker? No, sir. Well, I don't see how he can very well do it now. I fancy the announcement wouldn't be cordially received, sir. They'll have to meet by stealth. Even that will be a little difficult, sir. I should have mentioned that I chanced to be an auditor of a conversation between Mr. and Miss Stoker, from the substance of which I gathered that it was the gentleman's intention to keep Miss Stoker virtually in durance vile on board the yacht, not permitting her to go ashore during the remainder of their enforced stay in the harbour. But you said he didn't know anything about the engagement. Mr. Stoker's motive in immuring Miss Stoker on the vessel is not to prevent her encountering his lordship, but to obviate any chance of her meeting you, sir. The fact that you embraced the young lady has convinced him that her affection for you has persisted since your parting in New York. You're sure you really heard all this? Yes, sir. How did you come to do that? I was conversing with his lordship at the moment on one side of a screen of bushes when the conversation which I've described broke out on the other side. There was no alternative but to overhear Mr. Stoker's remarks. I started visibly. You were talking with Chuffy, did you say? Yes, sir. And he heard all that too? Yes, sir. About me kissing Miss Stoker? Yes, sir. Did it seem to stir him up? Yes, sir. What did he say? He mentioned something about scooping out your inside, sir. I wiped the brow. Jeeves, I said, this calls for careful thought. Yes, sir. Advise me, Jeeves. Well, sir, I think it might be judicious if you were to attempt to persuade his lordship that the spirit in which you embraced Miss Stoker was a purely brotherly one. Brotherly? You think I could get away with that? I fancy so, sir. After all, you are an old friend of the young lady. It would be quite understandable that you should bestow a kindly and dispassionate kiss upon her on learning of her betrothal to so close and intimate as his lordship. I rose. It may work, Jeeves. It's at least worth trying. I shall now leave you to prepare myself for the ordeal before me with silent meditation. Your tea will be here in a moment, sir. No, Jeeves, this is no time for tea. I must concentrate. I must have that story right before he arrives. I dare say I shall be getting a call from him shortly. It wouldn't surprise me if you were to find his lordship awaiting you at your cottage now, sir. He was absolutely correct. No sooner had I crossed the threshold than something exploded out of the armchair, and there was Chuffy gazing bleakly upon me. "Ah," he said, speaking the word between clenched teeth and generally comporting himself in an unpleasant and disturbing manner. "Here you are at last." I slipped him a sympathetic smile. "Yes, here I am, and I've heard all. Jeeves told me. Too bad, too bad. I little thought, old man, when I bestowed a brotherly kiss on Pauline Stoker by way of congratulating her on your engagement, that all this trouble would be bobbing up so soon afterwards." He continued to give me the eye. "Brotherly? Essentially brotherly. Old Stoker didn't seem to think so. Well, we know what sort of mind old Stoker has got, don't we? Brotherly? I registered manly regret. I suppose I shouldn't have done it. It was lucky for you I wasn't there when you did. But you know how it is when a fellow you've been at private school, Eton and Oxford with, gets engaged to a girl on whom you look as a sister. One's carried away." It was plain that a struggle was going on in the old boy's bosom. He glowered a bit and paced the room a bit, and, happening to trip over a footstool, he kicked it a bit. Then he became calmer. You could see reason returning to her throne. "Well, all right," he said, "but in future a little less of this fraternal stuff. Quite. Switch it off. Resist the impulse. Certainly. If you want sisters, seek them elsewhere. Just so. I don't want to feel when I'm married that at any moment I may come into the room and find a brother and sister act in progress." "I quite understand, old man. Then you still intend to marry this Pauline?" "Intend to marry her? Of course I intend to marry her. I'd look a silly ass not marrying a girl like that, wouldn't I? But how about the old Chuffnell scruples?" "What are you talking about?" "Well, if Stoker isn't going to buy the Hall, aren't you rather by way of being back in the position you were in before, when you wouldn't tell her your love, but let the thought of Watley like a worm in the bud feed on your damask cheek?" He gave a slight shudder. "Bertie," he said, "don't remind me of a time when I must have been absolutely potty. I can't imagine how I ever felt like that. You can take it as official that my views have changed. I don't care now if I haven't a bean and she's got a packet. If I can dig up 7 and 6 for the licence, and the couple of quid or whatever it is for the man behind the prayer book, this wedding is going through." "Fine. What does money matter? Quite. I mean, love's love. You never spoke a truer word, laddie. If I were you, I'd write her a letter embodying those views. You see, she may think that now your finances are rocky once more, you'll want to edge out. I will, and by Jove!" "What?" "Jeeves shall take it to her, thus removing any chance of old Stoker intercepting it." "Could he, do you think?" "My dear chap, a born letter interceptor. You can see it in his eye. I mean, could Jeeves take it? I don't see how. I should have told you that Stoker wanted Jeeves to leave me and enter his service. At the time I thought I'd never heard such crust in my life, but now I'm all for it. Jeeves shall go to him." I got on to the ruse or scheme. "I see what you mean. Operating under the Stoker banner, he'll be free to come and go." "Exactly. He can take a letter from you to her, and then one from her to you, and then one from you to her, and then one from her to you, and then one from you to her, and then one—" Yes, you got the idea. "And in the course of this correspondence, we can fix up some scheme for meeting. Have you any idea how long it takes to clear the decks for a wedding?" "I'm not sure. I believe if you get a special license, you can do it like a flash." "I'll get a special license. 2, 3. Well, this has certainly put the butter on the spinach. I feel a new man. I'll go and tell Jeeves at once. He can be on that yacht this evening." At this point, he suddenly stopped. The brow darkened once more, and he shot another of those searching looks at me. "I suppose she really does love me." "Dash it, old man, didn't she say so?" "She said so, yes. Yes, she said so. But can you believe what a girl says?" "My dear chap." "Well, they're great kidders. She may have been fooling me." "Morbid, laddie." He brooded a bit. "It seems so dash odd that she should have let you kiss her. I took her by surprise. She could have sloshed you on the ear. Why? She naturally divined that the embrace was purely brotherly." "Brotherly, eh?" "Wholly brotherly." "Well, it may be so," said Chuffy doubtfully. Have you any sisters, Bertie? No. But if you had, you'd kiss them. Repeatedly. Well, oh well, perhaps it's all right. You can believe a Wooster's word, can't you? I don't know so much. I remember you once, the morning after the boat race, our second year at Oxford, telling the magistrates your name was Eustace H. Plimsoll, and that you lived at the Laburnums, Allen Road, West Dulwich. That was a special case, calling for special measures. Yes, of course, yes, well, I suppose it's all right. You really do swear there's absolutely nothing between you and Pauline now? Nothing. We've often laughed heartily at the thought of that moment's madness in New York. I never heard you. Well, we have done, frequently. Oh? In that case, well, yes, I suppose. Well, anyway, I'll go off and write that letter. For some time after he'd left me, I remained with the feet up on the mantelpiece, relaxing. Take it for all in all, it had been a pretty strenuous day, and I was feeling the strain a bit. The recent exchange of thoughts with Chuffy alone had taken it out of the nervous system considerably, and when Brinkley came in and wanted to know when I'd have dinner, the thought of sitting down to a solitary steak and fried in the cottage didn't appeal. I felt restless, on edge. "I shall dine out, Brinkley," I said. This successor to Jeeves had been sent down by the agency in London, and I am bound to say he wasn't the fellow I'd have selected if I'd had the time to go round to the place and make a choice in person. Not at all the man of my dreams. A melancholy blighter with a long, thin, pimple-studded face and deep, brooding eyes, he'd shown himself averse from the start to that agreeable chit-chat between employer and employed to which the society of Jeeves had accustomed me. I'd been trying to establish cordial relations ever since he'd arrived, but with no success. Outwardly he was all respectfulness, but inwardly you could see that he was a man who was musing on the coming social revolution and looked on Bertram as a tyrant and an oppressor. "Yes, Brinkley, I shall dine out." He said nothing, merely looking at me as if he were measuring me for my lamppost. "I've had a fatiguing day, and I feel a need for the lights and the wine. Both of these, I should imagine, may be had in Bristol, and there ought to be a show of some kind playing there, don't you think? It's one of the #1 touring towns." He sighed slightly. All this talk of my going to shows was distressing him. What he really wanted was to see me sprinting down Park Lane with the mob after me with dripping knives. "I shall take the car and drive over there. You can have the evening off." "Very good, sir," he moaned. I gave it up. The man annoyed me. I hadn't the slightest objection to his spending his time planning massacres for the bourgeoisie, but I was dashed if I could see why he couldn't do it with a bright and cheerful smile. Dismissing him with a gesture, I went round to the garage and got the car out. It was only a matter of 30 miles or so to Bristol, and I got there in nice time for a comfortable bite before the theatre. The show was a musical comedy, which I'd seen on several occasions during its London run, but it stood up quite well on a further visit, and altogether I was feeling rested and refreshed when I started back home. I suppose it would have been getting on for midnight when I fetched up at the rural retreat, and being about ready for sleep by now, I lost no time in lighting a candle and toddling upstairs. As I opened the door of my room, I recollect I was thinking how particularly well a dollop of slumber would go, and I was just making for the bed with a song on my lips, so to speak, when something suddenly sat up in it. The next moment I dropped the candle and the room was plunged in darkness, but not before I'd seen quite enough to be getting along with. Reading from left to right, the contents of the bed consisted of Pauline Stoker in my heliotrope pyjamas with the old gold stripe.